People love saying the economy is too complicated to understand. I do not believe that. I think the economy only looks complicated when you insist on ignoring the few rules that explain most of what you see. That is the real problem. The average person is not confused because the world is impossible to understand. He is confused because he has been trained to react to headlines, slogans, and intentions instead of to incentives, trade-offs, prices, and consequences. Once you learn to look at those things, a great deal of the fog disappears. You stop being surprised by outcomes that used to feel unfair, mysterious, or backwards. You start understanding why some political promises sound compassionate and still make life worse. You start understanding why some businesses fail even when they seem noble. You start understanding why some countries with immense natural wealth stay poor, while places with almost nothing under the ground become rich. You start understanding why making something cheaper can make it disappear. You start understanding why the loudest moral language in economics is often attached to the weakest thinking. That is what I want to talk about. Not because I think economics is some elegant academic game. I think economics is one of the few disciplines that can teach a person how not to be fooled by good intentions wrapped around bad incentives. I have spent most of my life around businesses, capital markets, managers, workers, and politicians. The older I get, the less impressed I become by speeches, and the more impressed I become by systems. A system tells the truth much faster than a speech does. A system will reveal what people are really being rewarded to do. And once you see the reward structure, a great many outcomes stop feeling surprising. That is where I begin. Not with what people say they want, with what they are being paid, protected, punished, or encouraged to do, because people do not respond mainly to intentions, they respond to incentives. That is the first rule. You can see it in a boardroom, you can see it in a family, you can see it in a city, you can see it in a country. The slogans can change. Human response rarely does. Let us take a case people find emotionally satisfying at first. Tax the rich more. It sounds simple. There are wealthy people. The government wants more revenue. Some official decides the easiest political story is to raise taxes on high earners. It sounds fair. It sounds targeted. It sounds as if the pain will be isolated and the benefits will spread. Then reality enters. The source document describes what happened in Maryland in 2008 when the state expected a millionaire tax to bring in roughly $106 million more per year. Instead, the number of millionaires reportedly fell from about 8,000 to about 6,000 over time. And the tax base weakened badly enough that the state ended up losing revenue rather than gaining it. The same source also points to Oregon as another example where higher taxes on top earners did not behave the way the political sales pitch suggested. Fay file site, Fay turn 74, file 0 Fay. Now, you can debate every local detail, and any serious person should always respect that numbers need context. But the governing lesson is much bigger than one state. People move, capital moves, effort moves, talent moves, timing moves. If you make one place less attractive, some of the people you were counting on may leave, or they may reduce activity, or they may reclassify income, or they may simply choose to build elsewhere. That is not a moral endorsement of tax avoidance. It is a recognition that incentives are real. The politician says, "We intended to raise money." The economist asks, "What behavior did you reward?" That is the right question. Maryland may have intended to tax success. What it rewarded was departure, and departure is what it got. This is the rule people resist because it feels cold. Intentions do not govern outcomes. Incentives do. The same truth operates at the scale of everyday life. If you reward a child for drama, you get more drama. If you reward an employee for politics rather than results, you get more politics. If you reward a manager for preserving headcount rather than productivity, you get more bureaucracy. If you reward a city for spending rather than for results, you get more spending. The world keeps trying to fix incentive problems with speeches. I trust speeches very little. I trust behavior much more. That leads directly to the second rule. Everything has a cost, not only a price, a cost. The distinction matters. A person sees $10 in his pocket and thinks about what he can buy. A wiser person thinks about what he must give up. That is opportunity cost. A phrase too many people hear once and then leave on the classroom floor. But opportunity cost is one of the most useful ideas in all of economics, because it reminds you that every yes hides a no. If you spend money here, you cannot use it there. If you spend your hour on this, you cannot spend it on that. If your country puts resources into one thing, it does not put those same resources into another. That sounds obvious. It is astonishing how often people behave as if it were not. The document makes the point with a simple example. $10 cannot buy the coffee, the burger, and the movie all at once. Choosing one means abandoning another. It also points to a much bigger contrast between countries such as Venezuela, with massive oil reserves but deep dysfunction, and Switzerland, with little in natural resources yet extraordinary wealth, to show that possession alone is not the same thing as use. Fay file site Fay turn 74 file 0 Fay, that is exactly right. Resources do not make you rich. How you allocate them matters more. A country can sit on mountains of wealth and still mismanage itself into poverty. A person can earn a strong salary and still misallocate it into a thin life. Opportunity cost is the missing sentence in many bad financial decisions. Let me show you the adult version. A man buys a $50,000 car and calls it a reward. Fine, but that is not the real cost. The real cost includes what the cheaper, reasonable alternative would have allowed the extra money to become. The source uses a simple example of choosing a Toyota Corolla over a BMW and investing the difference, turning the hidden cost of the luxury decision into something closer to $250,000 over long enough time. Fay site Fay turn 74 file 0 Fay. That is not merely a cute finance trick. That is a way of seeing a luxury purchase is not only money spent, it is a future possibility abandoned. This is why rich people who stay rich tend to evaluate things differently from people who only look rich for short periods. The temporarily rich ask, "Can I afford this?" The structurally rich ask, "What does this prevent?" Those are different minds. And because they are different minds, they end up in different places. The third rule follows naturally from the first two. Prices are messages. This is one of the greatest truths people learn and then spend the rest of their lives resisting. They want prices to be moral statements. They want prices to be personal insults. They want prices to be evidence that someone bad is doing something bad. Sometimes that is true in narrow cases. Most of the time, price is not trying to offend you. Price is trying to tell you something. The source uses a strong example here, recounting the story of Margaret Thatcher explaining to Gorbachev that she did not personally ensure food reached the shelves. Prices did. It also walks through the absurd complexity of trying to centrally plan something as simple as pizza for an entire country. How much dough, how many tomatoes, how much cheese, how many ovens, which neighborhoods, what day, what topping preferences, what weather, what demand changes. The point is simple and devastating. No central planner can know quickly enough to coordinate what price signals coordinate automatically. Fay file site Fay turn 74 file 0 Fay. That is why prices matter so much. When something becomes scarce, the price rises. That rise is not only a burden on the buyer, it is a message to producers. Make more, bring more, ship more, repair more. Expand this. When there is too much of something, price falls. That is not merely a punishment, it is a message too. Slow down. Consumers do not want as much resources are needed elsewhere. That is what prices do all day. They summarize information that no minister, committee, or office could fully know in real time. This is why I become suspicious when people speak of prices as though they are the enemy. High prices can be painful. I am not romantic about that, but pain and information can coexist. If eggs become expensive, that is a signal. If housing becomes expensive, that is a signal. If labor becomes expensive, that is a signal. Let's put us not only whether the price annoys you, the question is what the price is telling you about scarcity, abundance, and competing use. That is where adults start, not with outrage, with inquiry. And that brings us to the fourth rule, which is where many governments lose the plot completely. Price controls do not create abundance. They create distortions. The source explains this using rent control in New York, where controlled prices allegedly contributed to mismatches between use and need, declining incentives for upkeep, and abandoned units even while homelessness remained visible. It also cites examples from Zimbabwe, where keeping food prices artificially low led to shortages, because sellers would not bring goods to market at a guaranteed loss. And from India, where guaranteeing overly high wheat prices led to overproduction and waste. The principle underneath all three stories is the same. Set a price below the market and demand rises while supply falls. Set a price above the market and supply rises while demand fails to clear it. Fay site Fay turn 74 file 0 Fay. This is not ideological dogma. It is one of the most mechanically reliable facts in economics. If you cap rents below what the market would otherwise bear, more people want apartments, and fewer owners want to supply or maintain them. If you force food prices too low during inflation, farmers and traders have less reason to bring food into the formal market. If you guarantee very high prices for one crop, farmers respond by producing too much of it. In each case, the politician says, "We are helping," the system says, "You are changing incentives." The poor are often hurt most in these experiments. That is the tragic part. Rich people can find workarounds. They know someone, they pay off someone, they move, they buy ahead, they use their networks. The poor wait in line. The poor discover the shelf is empty. The poor live in the apartment market where the honest route no longer clears. This is why I do not trust policies that begin with the sentence, "We will simply make it affordable by law." Affordability without supply is theater. You can make the sticker lower and still make the thing vanish. That is not compassion. That is stagecraft. The fifth rule is one many sentimental people resist because they think it is too harsh. Profits and losses are directions. They are not merely rewards and punishments. They are information. The source gives a childlike example of trading fruit snacks at a lunch table and learning from what works and what does not. Then scales the principle up to businesses and even government bailouts. The message is right. Profit says do more of this. Law says resources are being pulled into something less valued than what they could have done elsewhere. When a loss-making business closes, it is painful for the people involved, but it also releases labor, steel, buildings, energy, and managerial effort back into the wider economy. Those resources can then go toward things people actually want more. When governments keep dead companies alive indefinitely, they can freeze those resources in lower value uses. Fay turn 74 file 0 Fay. I have long believed that one of the most dangerous things a society can do is confuse economic pain with economic waste. Some pain is the cost of correction. Some failure is what clears the field for something better. This is not a reason to become cruel. It is a reason to stop imagining that every loss should be subsidized away. When a company cannot serve customers well enough to cover its costs, that failure is telling the truth. A bailout may hide the truth temporarily. It does not change the truth. And at the scale of your own life, this rule is just as useful. If a side project has been bleeding money, time, and energy for 3 years, that loss is information. If a habit consumes resources and returns almost nothing good, that loss is information. If a relationship to work produces very low value for the effort you are putting in, that is information too. Most people treat losses as shame. Often they should treat them as instruction. Now let us move to the sixth rule, which people take personally because it touches wages. Your wage is also a price. That sentence offends people because they think it reduces human worth to money. It does not. Human worth and market value are not identical, but in the labor market, a wage is still a price. The source explains this through a lemonade stand example. One worker helps sell 10 extra cups and creates $10 of extra value. Another helps sell only 2. The employer can sustainably pay very different amounts to those 2 workers. Extend that logic to the broader labor market, and the point is the same. A business can only pay workers out of the value those workers help create. If a worker's output is worth $10 an hour and law forces the business to pay $15, the business must either accept lower margins, raise prices, cut hours, automate, or stop hiring that worker altogether. Fay turn 74 file 0 Fay. This is one of those areas where slogans are especially dangerous. Workers deserve a living wage sounds noble. It is not a full argument. The full argument must answer the next question: what if the job does not yet create that much value? Now, a humane society may still choose to help those people through many means. Wage subsidies, tax credits, better training, transitional support, more growth, many tools exist. But pretending the problem disappears because the law declared a higher price is not serious thinking. The business still faces arithmetic. The machine still has to work. This does not mean every wage today is fair, far from it. It means fairness and feasibility are different questions. And if you want to earn more over the long run, the most reliable path is still to create more value that is difficult to replace. That is why skills matter. Not any skills tied closely enough to revenue, output, or scarcity that the market has to pay more for them. This is also why workers who understand economics make better career decisions. They stop asking only what title they want. They start asking what problem they can solve that someone must pay for. That is a much more useful question. Now, the seventh rule takes us from the individual to the global. Trade makes both sides richer. This is one of the least intuitive and most important truths in economics. The source uses the simple example of 2 children trading half a sandwich and half a pizza, so both end up happier without any new food being created. Then it scales the logic up to countries, explaining that even if one country is better at making everything, trade can still benefit both sides because each side can specialize where its relative advantage is strongest. It also compares the logic to a lawyer hiring a cleaner. Not because the lawyer cannot clean, but because the lawyer's hour is more valuable doing law than cleaning Fe-Phalocite. Fe turn 74 file 0 Fe, that is comparative advantage. People hate it because it ruins the war language around trade. Politicians love saying we are losing to other countries. It sounds strong, it sounds tribal, it sounds like someone will finally defend us. Most of the time it is nonsense. Trade is not mainly a fist fight. It is a specialization agreement. One side buys because it is better than making the thing itself at that cost. The other side sells because it is worthwhile. Both sides gain value. This is true not only for countries but for people. Every hour you spend doing what someone else could do cheaply and well is an hour stolen from the work only you can do best. That is why delegation matters. That is why specialization matters. That is why whole countries rise when they stop trying to do everything at once. A nation is not richer because it makes every single thing domestically, no matter the cost. It is richer when its people are free to produce where they are most effective and exchange the results for other goods and services efficiently. This is why I become suspicious whenever politics speaks in the language of national pride while ignoring cost. Pride is expensive when used to override arithmetic. The deeper lesson here is not even about trade policy. It is about how to live. Double down on your strengths. Trade for the rest. Do not spend your life fixing every weakness when someone else can handle that task better, and you can use your time where your advantage is real. That is economics. That is also good strategy. Now, let me tie these 7 rules together because individually they are useful and together they become a lens through which the world becomes much less confusing. People respond to incentives. Every choice has a trade-off. Prices carry information. Price controls distort reality. Profits and losses guide resources. Wages are prices linked to value creation. Trade lets people and nations specialize and become richer together. Once you understand those rules, you stop being surprised by a great many backward-looking outcomes. You understand why taxing a mobile group harder can shrink the base. You understand why cheap rent by decree creates shortages. You understand why cheap food by decree makes shelves go empty. You understand why zombie firms kept alive with public money can drain resources from better uses. You understand why your own wage rises fastest when your value does. You understand why spending your time on low-value tasks is often more expensive than you first realize. You understand why cooperation through exchange is usually wealthier than trying to produce everything in isolation. This does not make you rich automatically. I agree with the source on that final point. Understanding economics is not a lottery ticket. It will not turn ignorance into capital overnight. It will do something more durable. It will make you harder to fool. And being hard to fool is an extraordinary advantage in a world built on slogans. A person who does not understand economics is at the mercy of every emotional story he hears. A person who does understand a few of these rules starts asking better questions. What incentive is really being created here? What trade-off is being hidden? What is the price trying to say? What happens to supply if this policy succeeds politically? What happens to demand if this rule changes behavior? What value am I actually creating? Where is specialization being rewarded? What result is this system likely to produce? Not what result is being promised. That kind of thinking is rare. It is also powerful. Most people live close enough to economics to feel its consequences and far enough from it to misunderstand them. That is why they keep getting fooled. They mistake intent for outcome. They mistake low prices for abundance. They mistake high wages by decree for created value. They mistake rescue for recovery. They mistake trade for war. They mistake profits for greed and losses for injustice without asking what information is being carried. I want people to stop doing that, not because I want them to become cold, because I want them to become clear. Clarity is not cruelty. It is one of the most humane tools we have because it stops us from repeating expensive mistakes wrapped in comforting language. Now, if I had to reduce everything I just said to one sentence, it would be this. The economy is not a machine for rewarding what sounds good. It is a system for revealing what incentives, trade-offs, and prices actually produce. That is the truth. Learn that, and the world becomes much less mysterious. Ignore it. And you will spend the rest of your life surprised by outcomes that were visible all along.